Welcome back. Nigeria's growing housing shortage, estimated at between 15 and 20 million units nationwide, is worsening affordability challenges, particularly in Lagos and Abuja, where rents have risen beyond the reach of many working-class citizens. Critics blame landlords, property agents, and market speculation for inflating demand and pushing up prices. Not by 100%. In most cases, you find houses have been pushed up to 200%. Many residents are now calling for urgent government intervention, including rent caps, better transportation links, and large-scale housing construction to ease the pressure.
Frustrations have spilled onto social media, with Nigerians lamenting that even decent salaries can no longer secure modest accommodation. One user noted that an annual income of 2.4 million naira is still insufficient to rent a good apartment in Lagos, while others warned that the current rent bubble is unsustainable. In Abuja, tenants face similar struggles. A resident reported being told that 1.5 million naira could no longer secure a two-bedroom apartment in Wuse. And I dare to say that that's really very ambitious, because some people are paying that for one-bedroom apartment. And this we're talking about was with additional agency legal fees adding up to 30% of the cost. Now, joining us to discuss this is strategist and fair housing advocate Ayodele Adio. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Good to be here.
Before we go into the conversation, let's give a bit of idea and background into, the regulatory agencies. Amid growing complaints from tenants, attention is now turning to the Lagos State Real Estate Regulatory Authority, LASRERA, the agency legally mandated to regulate real estate transactions in the state. Now, what are the key duties of LASRERA? Regulating real estate transactions and practices in Lagos State, registering and licensing real estate practitioners, agents, and developers, protecting the public from fraudulent and real estate activities, receiving and resolving complaints between tenants, landlords, and agents, monitoring real estate charges and ensuring transparency, setting standards for ethical conduct in the sector, creating a database of registered practitioners and property transactions. Now, despite these many responsibilities, many residents argue that illegal charges, arbitrary rent hikes, and exploitative agency fees continues unchecked. You may now head to our YouTube channel to share your personal experience. We've seen a few comments that we'll take from YouTube about what the current realities are for you. Where do you live? How much is your rent? Has there been an increase? What was it before and what is it now? We're streaming live on News Central TV on YouTube. Mr. Adio, the rent crisis is one that is heartbreaking. Even in a number of us that live in estates, we go to the estate WhatsApp group, and people are lamenting about rents being increased to the tune of 100%. And you would wonder why this is happening, especially because people's income is not increasing. How many people have had 100% salary increase in the past 1 year that they're paying rent? So what would you say is the reason why we're here? Why citizens now have to pay an arm and a leg to be able to afford decent housing in Lagos and in Abuja? I don't know if it's, if that's the reality in other parts of Nigeria.
Well, I mean, there's a philosophical root to this crisis, and that philosophical root is the worldview that property or housing is going to be seen purely as a market asset and not a public good. And once you view housing purely as a market asset and not a public good, you stop asking the question who is going to live in these houses. The question you start to ask is who's going to pay the highest for this property. And that has led us into the crisis that we are currently experiencing today. Of course, the biggest share of this responsibility has been the utter negligence of the political class that have allowed this problem to fester, largely because there has hardly been any meaningful intervention by the state government to intervene in this market that is truly crushing middle-income people and has completely excluded those at the lower rung of the ladder. And this is even going beyond just the housing crisis. What is likely to escalate into is going to be a social crisis, because the truth is, when people can no longer afford to pay their rents, and they can no longer afford to take care of their families because of the mounting bills that they have to deal with, corruption is going to fester, crime is going to worsen, and people have to cut corners to just survive. And we cannot have a society where, because people cannot cope with the reality of rising costs, start to take laws into their hands or begin to get agitated. That portends a very dangerous future for us, as a people. And I think that fundamentally, that lack of intervention from the state government to have allowed this crisis to continue to fester has led us into this crisis where people are drowning in debt and are struggling to just cope with basic living expenses.
Before Gbenga goes on, let me just read a comment from YouTube. Chuka Ochiama says, house rent in Port Harcourt since last year has been the exclusive reserve for the very rich. A bedroom flat ranges from 1.5 million naira to 2 million naira.
Yeah, it's a problem. Listen, you see, the most annoying part is that there is a huge divorce between the rents that you see in the market and the economic realities of the people you expect to pay these rents. So like you alluded to in your introduction, the income of the average Nigerian or the average Lagosian has stagnated over the last decade. In fact, I'm even being generous to say it is stagnated because the average purchasing power of the average Lagosian has plummeted by at least 40% over the last 5 years. So in real terms, your income per capita has crossed from about $3,000 to $800 as an individual. And in that same period of time, rents have gone up by 150%. So explain to me how people whose income has stagnated and plummeted over the last decade are supposed to pay rents that are climbing by over 100%. Now, it's not just bad enough that these rents are going up at an astronomical level, is the way and manner in which these rents are being implemented. So you can just wake up one morning, 4 months to when your rent expires, and you get a very nice letter from your landlord that, listen, that 2 million you want to pay in 4 months as your rent has become 4 million naira. And then you ask the question, how are you supposed to meet an extra 2 million naira in the next 4 months to be able to pay that rent? And you see, these things continue to happen because it looks to me that there is complete inertia from the state government, and you cannot let this happen.
Now, let's talk about this from economic point of view. The landlords are also Nigerians. We've seen runaway inflation. They go to Nigerian markets, and they're in this not for altruistic reasons, because it's a business. I think they're there to make a profit. So when the price of fuel, food, general inflation, how are they supposed to survive? And also, the state governments are not providing alternative housing. The basic principle of economics is about demand and supply. If you flood the market with state-owned cheaper alternatives, of course, it will make the market very competitive, and then the landlords won't be able to, because people have alternatives. So now we're left to their mercy. Do you think we're being too hard on the landlords and the homeowners? So
you're right to say that it's not a landlord problem per se. And you're right to also say that we've had a supply problem because the state hasn't been investing enough in affordable housing, and it's not been investing enough in social housing. I don't even think that the state has invested in social housing in the last 20 years.
Luxury. You will love
right.
it.
So you have a situation in Lagos State where public land and public incentives have been used to build housing that has excluded the public, right? And that has, led us to a situation now where there is a crisis that you really and truly cannot solely blame the landlords, because it's a market that it's completely, where demand has completely outweighed supply. But the reality is, right, you have to work and chew gum at the same time. While you deal with the supply issue, we also have to regulate the rate at which these rents are going up. And I give you a typical example. Think of a city like Paris, for instance. 25% of the homes in Paris are now social housing. So the government has intervened to ensure that 25% of the housing stock in Paris are social housing. In fact, they have an ambitious goal that by 2035, 40% of the housing stock will be public housing, right? And that's because they understand the reality of the working class. But even more importantly, they've also stepped in November 2018, if I remember correctly, to put together a 8-year policy to regulate rent hikes. And they've done that since 2019 when it kicked off in about March, up until this very moment. It's supposed to expire in 2026. And Parliament is debating whether to extend it or not. But there has been a study conducted.
And that's a free market economy.
And that's a free market economy. And there's a study that shows that indeed it helped reduce rental costs in Paris. And even more importantly, as people usually, as neoliberalists will always debate, it hasn't intervened in the amount of supply coming into the market, because usually people will tell you that if you put rent hikes, landlords will not build and it will kill. But that's not being the reality in Paris. So my argument is very simple. There is inflation. How many percent is it now? They say how many? 15, 20%?
24 or so?
Okay, let's say 25%. That is inflation of 25%, right? Landlords can raise rents by 25%. And you can give a window
and it's fair
of a 5% cap on that 25%. So, okay, you're hedged at 25%. And you can make another extra 5 to 10%, depending on the market reality in your locality in Lagos. So you're left with an average of 35% increase that has been wedged against inflation. And that is fair game. So, but the idea that people can simply raise rents by over 200%, I think is completely ridiculous. And that cannot and should not continue to happen.
I also want to look at this, because if you said 25%, anybody who's paying a rent of 2.5 million now,
yes,
and then you add 25%, that's about 625,000.
Yes.
Right? So give or take, you'll be paying about 3.25,000.
Yes.
Which is not bad.
Yes.
But what we have now is, if one is paying rent of 2.5, I mean, let me just go with the reality on ground. I mean, I personally know what the rent is now, and then I have friends and family members who were paying 2 million, and then they are being told just now that, listen, you have to pay 4.5.
Yes.
I mean, that's over 100%.
It's ridiculous.
The big question people are asking is, how do we get out of this doldrum? How do we leave this particular situation we're in? Because when I spoke to a house owner, we're discussing, and he said, listen, say all you want, Joe, say all you want on TV. Like he said, you know, go work, because the government don't build houses.
Yes.
The cost of cement is expensive. It's 10,000 naira for a bag. So they should come and tell us.
Yeah.
And we're still going to pay in quotes, the area boys, the urchins, every other thing. There's land use act to pay all of that. They should come and tell us. They shouldn't tell us, rather, how we're going to regulate our...
But it doesn't make sense. If they are doing 100% increment and inflation is at 15%, make it make sense.
So how do we handle that?
I mean, listen, again, that's why I said we have to work and chew gum at the same time. You cannot solve this problem without addressing the supply side, right? So government has to be deliberate in raising the amount of supply in the market. And I've argued consistently that government has to be building nothing less than 20,000 housing units every year, right? At the very least, it has to start with that. So you have to increase the supply coming into the market. You also have to dismantle the current public-private partnerships that the Lagos State government has engaged in over the last 10 years. The Lagos State government has no business engaging in public-private partnerships that are building houses in Victoria Island and in Ikeja GRA.
It's not even mass housing.
Exactly.
They have demolished
selling houses at market rates.
They have chased people out of areas saying overriding public interest,
yes,
just to build luxury houses.
Exactly. So those things cannot work, right? So you have to address the supply issue by, investing in enough public housing, social housing.
How can they start? When? What's the time frame?
Again, see,
it's not like they're not building.
Let's go back memory
to be honest with you,
it's not like they're not building.
To be honest,
but it's who is getting the houses that are being built.
No, so again, you've touched on that nerve. It was sad. I forgot to bring the documents because, I wanted to show you from their own reports the amount of housing stock that they have built over the last 20 years. And I can tell you for free that in the last 24 years, the current party that is running Lagos have not built the amount of housing Jack Conde built in 4 years, right? Wow. But let me even tell you the sad part of it is that even many of the houses that have been built, mostly even by public-private partnerships, are priced beyond middle-income people.
Yeah.
So you have these houses in Victoria Island, you have some in Ikeja GRA that are priced at market rates, right? Of course, you have some in Abramade Soya and a few of them here and there. But even the ones that are reasonably priced that you can access, right? Many of them are empty as we speak. And you know why? Because people who had the information that these houses were going to be built have already bought them off, right?
All right.
And then the third tier are even the ones that are even available that you can even access, which is minuscule, right?
Okay.
You're expected to put down a lump sum to be able to pick these houses because you have no mortgaging system.
That's another
that says
one.
that Benga can simply put a 30% down
And pay
payment
over the course
and
of
pay
10
over
years. You know what?
15
Let's
years.
go on a very quick break. We'll come back. I'm seeing comments. You know, someone has shared how much he was buying cement at the time he started building his house and what the current reality is. We'll go on a break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation about housing and the challenge that it is in Lagos and Abuja and Nigeria in general, really. Welcome back to Breakfast Central. We're still looking at the cost of housing in Nigeria. I'll take a comment on YouTube. Of course, we're streaming live via New Central TV. Melvin Oriawo says, building materials have skyrocketed. When I started my project 2 years ago, cement was 2,000 naira.
Yeah.
Now I'm buying at 11,500 naira. Sand was 70,000 naira. Now 150,000 naira. Rod was 7,000 naira. Now 15,000 naira. I'm not talking about other things. So how do you tell somebody like this, who is paying exorbitant rates, to then cap his rent within a specific figure?
So, to be honest, again, like I said, I understand the reality. And when I'm talking about rent regulation, I'm not necessarily talking about the new tenants that is coming into the new building,
Yeah.
right? So the housing, we're already living in buildings already. The houses have already been built, right? So on what basis are you increasing by 200%? The houses are built.
You're not refurnished.
So my argument is not for the new stock that are coming into
The
the market,
already
right?
existing one.
So you can price whatever you want to price coming into the market, right? And it's a willing buyer, willing seller. So if I see your property and I want to pay 10 million for it, that's fine. I rent that property for 10 million. But when I do rent that property at 10 million, my argument is that going forward, you can't wake up one morning
I say pay 20 million.
and say pay 20 million.
Do you know-
you can't have such an unregulated
Do you know the way
market.
they
It
will go
doesn't make
around
any
this?
sense.
Do you know the way they will go around this? They will then typically, they shouldn't increase rent in the first 2 years. After 2 years, they'll tell you they have a family member who needs the house,
Yes.
and then they will evict you, increase the rent, and put someone. So I feel like it's a catch-22 situation, and I don't know how we
that's
can
why
get
you
out of it.
cannot just solve the problem on one end alone, right? You have to use multiple instruments at the same time. So while you're addressing the supply problem, there also has to be enforcement. So take Lekki 1, for instance. Lekki 1 was built as a purely residential area. 40 to 50% of Lekki 1 is now commercial.
Commercial, yeah.
And I think I'm even being
Modest.
I think it's more than
with it.
about 6.5.
So what we have to do is to ensure that places that are supposed to be residential are purely residential. So you don't allow commercial entities to creep into places like Lekki 1. And if you want to let out your place to a commercial, you pay premium. And that extra that is paid as premium goes into funding social housing. We also have to ensure that people cannot simply run Airbnbs arbitrarily in places, like Lekki and Ikeja and things like that. Because the truth is, these Airbnbs are not taxed in the ways that hotels are not regulated like hotels, and don't have the overheads that hotels have. But they are pushing prices up because many of these these Airbnbs are built by people who don't live in Nigeria, who let the houses out. And really, Benga, if I can make a year's rent, what used to be a year's rent, in a month from my Airbnb, why am I going to let my property out for rent? Right? So we cannot allow Airbnbs to proliferate Lagos unregulated. It makes no sense to me, especially when those Airbnbs are situated, in residential
Just before
areas.
we go, LSDPC is the Lagos State Property and Development Corporation that is meant to build social housing and all of this. And you mentioned something very instructive and sobering, that in Jakonde's 4 years, he was able to build what this APC government hasn't built in 24 years, which is a big, big indictment and a shame on the government. What did Jakonde do that they can't do now?
Nothing, it's just the worldview.
And then the technology is even, you can build
better. Even better
the
now.
technology is better
More
now.
machines.
Benga, you don't need, it's not about a level of sophistication or a certain educational attainment that will make you drive some of these policies All you simply need is a level of empathy, right? And a change of worldview. I keep hammering that this idea that you can use, and I'm glad that you mentioned the LSDPC, because you can't continue to use public land and public incentives to drive public housing that excludes the public, right? Because you have to view housing again, not just as a market asset, but as public good. Because houses are not like designer t-shirts that I can decide whether I want to buy them or not. They are not like, you know, a five-star meal in a restaurant that I can decide to cook in my house.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yes.
It's a fundamental need. It's a fundamental right. Every one of us have to live somewhere, right? And to that extent, you cannot just allow it to be completely unregulated, especially like I mentioned earlier, when even many of the most capitalist societies in the world are regulating housing. So you have to solve this problem in a multifaceted approach. Because while you're dealing with the supply issue, which starts with a fundamental acknowledgement that people do need housing, and we have to view housing as a public good, it would also inform your city planning strategy, which has also been absent in Lagos. You asked the question when we're off air, why aren't people living in Badagry, right? People would live in Badagry if you can connect them to the central business district within an hour in a predictable manner. So the problem is also a lack of connectivity around Lagos.
Road networks.
And road networks that make people commute from their place of residence to the place of their work. So if we're able to fix connectivity issue, improve the supply into the market, and then regulate effectively, I believe that we're going to deal with this issue decisively. But this idea that we have a hands-off approach, the political elites are just simply looking out their window while the people are crushed under the weight of these heavy rents, I think is highly insensitive. It is really insensitive, and
it is insensitive.
Something has to give.
And everyone is feeling it. We're all feeling the pinch.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We'll continue to shine the spotlight on the rent crisis in Nigeria.